Paul stood in the middle of the Xilari training arena, rolling his shoulders as he studied the space around him. The arena was massive, surrounded by towering walls, and packed with spectators. Xilari warriors stood in neat rows, their glowing eyes watching in silence. Above them, on a grand balcony, Queen Kaivana and the High Council observed the event. Paul took a deep breath. He had been in difficult situations before, but this was different. Today, he was supposed to train the princess of an alien empire, except Vairi didn't seem too eager to learn from him. The princess stood across from him, arms crossed, her expression a mix of boredom and annoyance. "This is pointless," she muttered. "I don't need a human to teach me anything." Paul sighed. He had dealt with stubborn students before, but Vairi was something else. "Look, I didn't come here to waste your time. If you already know everything, prove it." Vairi narrowed her eyes. "Fine. We fight." Paul's eyebrows shot up. "Fight? I thought we were training." "This is training," she said with a smirk. "If you are to teach me, you must first show me your strength." A murmur spread through the watching warriors. They seemed excited about this. Paul, on the other hand, wasn't sure this was a good idea. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I mean, I'm human. I don't have claws, armor, or super strength." Vairi stepped forward, raising her fists. "Then this will be over quickly." Paul sighed and loosened his stance. He had no choice now. If he refused, he would lose respect. If he lost too easily, she would never take him seriously. He had to prove that humans were more than just fragile beings. A loud chime rang through the arena. The fight had begun. Vairi moved fast, faster than Paul expected. She closed the distance between them in an instant, throwing a powerful punch straight at his chest. Paul barely dodged, stepping to the side just in time. He felt the air shift as her fist passed him. If that had landed, it would have knocked him down for sure. She didn't slow down. Spinning around, she kicked toward his ribs. Paul ducked, rolling away before she could hit him. The crowd murmured again, surprised that he had avoided her attacks. Vairi frowned. "You run well, human, but you can't avoid me forever." Paul smiled. "I don't need to avoid you forever. I just need to think faster than you." Vairi charged again, but this time, Paul was ready. Instead of dodging, he stepped forward at the last second, using her own momentum against her. He grabbed her wrist and twisted slightly, forcing her off balance. She stumbled, her eyes widening in surprise. Paul quickly stepped back, keeping his hands up. "See, strength isn't everything. A fight isn't just about power. It's about control." Vairi gritted her teeth and lunged again. Paul continued to dodge and counter, never meeting her attacks with direct force. He used his agility and quick thinking, staying just out of her reach. He wasn't winning through strength. He was winning through strategy. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. The Xilari were warriors, but they had never seen a fight like this. They were used to battles of brute force, not tactical movement. Even Queen Kaivana seemed intrigued. After several minutes, Vairi stepped back, breathing heavily. She wasn't exhausted, but she was clearly frustrated. Paul smiled and lowered his hands. "You're fast and strong, but you rely too much on power. If I were another Xilari, maybe that would work. But humans, we fight differently." Vairi stared at him for a moment, then let out a small chuckle. "You are not as weak as I thought." Paul smirked. "And you're not as unbeatable as you thought." The queen stood from her throne. "Enough. The lesson begins tomorrow." Paul nodded, feeling a sense of victory. He had survived his first challenge. Now, the real training would begin. The grand palace of the Xilari Empire stood tall, its golden spires reaching toward the twin suns. Paul stepped out of the transport pod, his boots clicking against the polished metal floor. He adjusted his uniform, feeling the weight of 100 alien eyes on him. He was the only human here, and it was clear that his presence was unusual. Two towering Xilari guards, their dark blue armor gleaming under the palace lights, flanked him as they led him down the vast hallways. The Selari were a powerful warrior race, known for their strict traditions and battle-hardened culture. Paul had studied them before, but nothing could have prepared him for this moment. The doors to the throne room slid open with a deep hum, revealing a massive chamber filled with nobles, warriors, and officials. At the far end sat Queen Savannah, her golden crown resting between her curved horns. She was taller than any human, her sharp green eyes studying Paul with an intensity that made him uneasy. Paul took a deep breath and stepped forward. He had been sent here as a diplomat, but no one had told him why. The silence in the room was thick, the air heavy with unspoken words. Then, the Queen's voice echoed through the hall. "You will satisfy my daughter, human." Paul froze. A ripple of murmurs spread through the gathered crowd. His heart pounded as he processed her words. What did she mean? He had heard that different species sometimes had strange translations, but this sounded wrong. He cleared his throat, trying to keep his voice steady. "Your Majesty, I don't understand." The Queen's expression remained unreadable. "My daughter, Princess Viri, lacks the strength expected of a Selari warrior. She must learn from one who has the spirit of survival. The High Council believes a human may offer what she needs." Paul blinked. "You want me to train her?" The Queen nodded. "Teach her the ways of your kind. Show her what makes humans special." Paul let out a slow breath. He had been expecting political discussions, trade agreements, maybe even peace talks. But now he was supposed to train an alien princess. A figure stepped forward from the side of the throne. Princess Viri. She was smaller than most Selari warriors, though still taller than Paul. Her deep purple skin shimmered under the throne room's golden lights. Her arms were crossed, and her piercing gaze showed clear skepticism. "This is a waste of time," she said, her voice sharp. "Humans are weak. What can he teach me?" Paul fought back a smirk. He had seen that kind of attitude before, prideful, stubborn, and full of doubt. But he wasn't about to back down. "I guess we'll find out," he said. The Queen's lips curled into what might have been a smile. "Then it is decided. The training begins tomorrow." Paul nodded, but inside, he was already wondering what he had just gotten himself into. The training hall was quieter than Paul expected. The Selari were a warrior race, but today, only Princess Viri stood before him. She had her arms crossed, her usual look of skepticism still on her face. Paul adjusted his stance, trying to think of the best way to start. "All right," he said, clapping his hands together. "Since we've already fought, let's talk about what you learned." Viri scoffed. "I learned that humans are fast, but they don't hit hard." Paul chuckled. "Not exactly. You saw how I avoided your attacks." "That wasn't just speed. It was strategy." Viri frowned. "Strategy. A real fight is about strength. The strongest warrior wins." Paul shook his head. "That's not always true. Humans don't survive because we're the strongest. We survive because we adapt, we think, and we use our enemies' weaknesses against them." Viri narrowed her eyes. "So you fight with tricks." Paul smirked. "I fight smart. Let me show you." He walked over to a training dummy made of heavy metal, built to withstand the force of Selari warriors. "All right, hit this with everything you've got." Viri didn't hesitate. She stepped forward and delivered a powerful punch. The force echoed through the hall, and the dummy shook slightly. She stepped back, looking satisfied. Paul nodded. "Good. You're strong. But now watch this." Instead of punching the dummy, he stepped to the side and gave it a quick, precise push at a small joint near its base. The dummy wobbled, then suddenly tipped over, crashing onto the ground. Viri's eyes widened. "How did you?" Paul grinned. "I didn't use strength. I used leverage. Everything, even the strongest warrior, has a weak point. If you hit the right spot, you don't need strength." Very stared at the fallen dummy, then back at Paul. For the first time, there was a spark of curiosity in her expression. "So, humans win by being clever?" she asked. Paul nodded. "Exactly. We're not the strongest, but we always find a way. That's what makes us dangerous." Vairi was silent for a moment. Then she stepped forward. "Teach me." Paul smiled. Now we're getting somewhere. Their training had officially begun. The training hall was larger than any Paul had ever seen. High above, glowing orbs floated in the air, casting a golden light over the smooth metal floor. The walls were lined with weapons, long, curved blades, heavy staffs, and strange alien devices Paul couldn't even begin to understand. Princess Vairi stood in the center of the hall, her arms crossed as she watched Paul with her usual skeptical expression. "So, what will you teach me today, human?" she asked. Paul smiled, tossing a small wooden stick into the air and catching it. "Today, we're going to learn how to think like a warrior." Vairi raised an eyebrow. "I already think like a warrior." Paul chuckled. "You think like an auxiliary warrior, but humans, we think differently. If you want to be stronger, you have to change how you see a fight." Vairi's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't argue. That was already progress. Paul walked over to a large training dummy in the shape of an auxiliary soldier. "All right, imagine you're in battle. Your opponent is bigger than you, stronger than you. How do you win?" Vairi stepped forward without hesitation. "I hit them harder. I attack first." Paul shook his head. "That works against weaker enemies, but what if they're stronger than you? What if they expect your attack?" Vairi frowned. "Then I fight until I win." Paul smiled. "That's the auxiliary way. But let me show you something else." He picked up a handful of small training balls from a nearby table. They were light, made of some soft material. He handed one to Vairi. "Try to hit me with this," he said. Vairi scoffed. "This is a game for children." Paul shrugged. "Maybe, but humor me." Vairi sighed and threw the ball. She was fast, but Paul dodged easily. She threw another. He ducked. Another. He sidestepped. After a few more, she growled in frustration. "You're just running away." Paul grinned. "No, I'm making you tired. You're using all your energy trying to hit me, and I haven't even attacked yet." Vairi paused, her breathing slightly heavier. "That's a trick." Paul nodded. "It's a strategy. A fight isn't just about who is stronger. It's about control. The best warrior doesn't just attack. They wait. They make their enemy waste energy. They look for weaknesses, and when the moment is right." Before Vairi could react, Paul flicked his wrist, sending one of the training balls flying. It hit her shoulder with a soft tap. She blinked in surprise. "They strike," Paul finished with a smirk. Vairi stared at him for a long moment. Then, instead of getting angry, she smiled. "I see," she said. "You fight with patience." Paul nodded. "Exactly. You don't always have to be the strongest. You just have to be the smartest." Vairi looked down at the training ball in her hand, her fingers tightening around it. For the first time, Paul saw something different in her expression. Understanding. "Teach me more," she said. Paul smiled. "That's what I'm here for." Their real training had just begun. The training had continued for days, and Paul could see the change in Vairi. She was no longer just relying on her strength. She was thinking, observing, and using strategy in fights. She still had her auxiliary pride, but now she was willing to listen to learn. Paul stood in the training hall, watching as Vairi sparred with another auxiliary warrior. This time, she wasn't just attacking wildly. She was patient, waiting for the right moment. When her opponent swung too hard, she stepped aside, using their own force against them. Within seconds, she had them on the ground, victorious. The watching warriors murmured among themselves. They had never seen Vairi fight like this before. Some seemed impressed, others skeptical. Paul noticed one figure standing apart from the rest. Commander Ralvik. He was a high-ranking Silari warrior, taller and broader than most, with deep scars across his arms. His golden eyes were locked onto Paul, filled with quiet disdain. Paul had seen that look before. Ralvik didn't like humans. As the warriors dispersed, Ralvik approached, his steps heavy against the metal floor. "You have changed the princess's way of fighting," Ralvik said, his voice deep and slow. Paul met his gaze calmly. "She's learning to think differently. That's a good thing." Ralvik crossed his arms. "Silari warriors do not need tricks. We fight with strength and honor." Paul smirked. "And if strength isn't enough?" Ralvik's eyes narrowed. "It is always enough." Paul could tell arguing wouldn't change anything. Some warriors refused to see things differently. But Ralvik wasn't just another warrior. He was respected, powerful, and dangerous. Ralvik took a step closer. "I have heard the Queen favors you. She believes humans can teach us." His voice dropped lower. "But I do not." Paul sighed. "I'm not here to prove anything to you, Commander. I'm here to train the princess." Ralvik smirked. "Then you will not refuse a challenge." Paul frowned. "What kind of challenge?" Ralvik stepped back, raising his voice so the others could hear. "A duel. You and I, in the arena. If you win, I will accept that humans have something to teach us." A murmur spread through the watching warriors. Some seemed excited. Others looked uncertain. Paul wasn't sure what to say. He knew Ralvik didn't respect him. But this challenge wasn't just about that. This was about proving whether a human truly belonged here. Before he could answer, a voice cut through the hall. "I accept." Paul turned in surprise. Vaire had stepped forward, her expression cold. "If you challenge my teacher, you challenge me." Ralvik chuckled. "I challenge the human, not you, princess." Vaire's eyes burned with determination. "Then you challenge both of us." The room fell silent. Even Ralvik seemed surprised. Paul sighed. "Well, this just got complicated." The Queen's voice suddenly echoed from the entrance of the hall. "Then it is decided," she said, her presence commanding the attention of all. "Tomorrow, the duel will take place in the grand arena." Ralvik smirked. "I will see you both there." As he walked away, Paul turned to Viri. "You didn't have to do that." Viri crossed her arms. "Yes, I did." Paul exhaled, shaking his head. "Then we better be ready. Tomorrow, they would fight. And losing was not an option." The grand arena was filled with the sound of drums and the low murmurs of the gathered Silari warriors. The massive structure, built from ancient stone and metal, had hosted countless battles. Today, it would witness something never seen before: a human and a princess standing together against one of the strongest warriors in the empire. Paul stood beside Viri, rolling his shoulders and stretching his arms. The heat of the twin suns beat down on the sand beneath his boots. He glanced at Viri, who stood tall, her purple skin shimmering under the light. Her expression was calm, focused. "Are you ready for this?" Paul asked. Viri smirked. "I was born ready. The real question is, are you?" Paul chuckled. "Honestly, not really. But that never stopped me before." Across the arena, Commander Ralvik stood like an immovable mountain. His battle armor gleamed, and his sharp golden eyes were locked onto them. His confidence was clear. He didn't believe for a second that they could win. Queen Ivana stood on a raised platform, her presence alone enough to silence the crowd. She raised her hand, signaling the start of the duel. "Begin." The moment the word left her lips, Ralvik moved. He was fast, much faster than Paul expected. In a single bound, he was already in front of them, swinging his heavy staff in a wide arc. Paul barely had time to react as Viri leaped forward, meeting the attack with her own weapon. Their weapons clashed with a loud clang, sending sparks flying. Paul took the chance to move. While Viri kept Ralvik busy with her strength, Paul circled around, looking for an opening. He knew that facing Ralvik head-on would be a mistake. This fight had to be won with strategy, not brute force. Viri struck again, aiming for Ralvik's legs, but the commander dodged effortlessly. With a sudden counter, he slammed his elbow into Viri's side, sending her stumbling back. Paul saw his chance. He lunged forward, aiming for Ralvik's exposed back. But Ralvik was faster. He spun around, swinging his staff toward Paul. Paul ducked just in time, feeling the wind from the attack rush past his head. He rolled to the side, regaining his footing. "You rely on tricks, human," Ralvik said, his voice steady. "But tricks will not save you." Paul smirked. Maybe not, but thinking ahead might. He glanced at Viri, who met his eyes for a split second. She understood. They moved together. Viri attacked high, while Paul struck low. Ralvik blocked Viri's strike, but in doing so, he left his leg exposed. Paul kicked out, striking just behind Ralvik's knee. The commander stumbled, just for a moment, but it was enough. Viri seized the opportunity, slamming her weapon against his shoulder with full force. Ralvik grunted, forced back a few steps. The crowd murmured in surprise. No one had ever made Ralvik move like that before. His expression darkened. "You dare challenge me with such tactics?" Viri smirked. "You're just upset they're working." Ralvik growled and attacked again, his strikes becoming more aggressive. But now, Paul and Viri were in sync. When one moved, the other followed. They dodged, countered, and struck when the moment was right. Ralvik was strong, but he was used to fighting alone. Paul and Viri were working as a team, and it was throwing him off. Finally, as Ralvik raised his staff for a powerful strike, Paul called out, "Now." Viri ducked low and swept her leg across the sand, knocking Ralvik off balance. At the same time, Paul struck his wrist, forcing him to drop his weapon. Ralvik hit the ground with a heavy thud. The arena fell silent. Paul and Viri stood over him, breathing hard but victorious. Queen Sivana rose from her throne. "The duel is over," she announced. "The lesson is learned." Ralvik slowly sat up, his expression unreadable. Then, to Paul's surprise, he let out a small chuckle. "You are clever, human," he admitted. "And you, Princess Viri, have truly grown." Paul and Viri exchanged a look before turning back to him. "Does this mean you accept what we have to teach?" Paul asked. Ralvik smirked. "It means I will listen." It wasn't a complete victory, but it was enough. As the crowd erupted in cheers, Paul knew one thing. Humans had earned their place in the Xilari Empire. The cheers of the crowd still echoed in the grand arena as Paul and Viri stepped away from the battleground. Their victory over Commander Ralvik had changed everything. Paul wiped sweat from his forehead and looked at Viri. She stood tall, her expression calm, but he could see the pride in her eyes. "You did good," he said with a grin. Viri smirked. "I had a good teacher." Before Paul could respond, Queen Sivana's voice rang out across the arena. "Step forward." Paul and Viri obeyed, walking toward the royal platform where the queen stood. Ralvik was already there, standing with his arms crossed. His expression was unreadable, but he was no longer looking at Paul with pure disdain. The queen's piercing gaze moved between them. This duel was more than just a fight. It was a test. And today, something new has begun. The gathered warriors murmured among themselves. Some nodded in approval, while others still looked skeptical. Queen Sivana turned to Paul. "You have proven that humans are not weak, that intelligence and strategy can be as powerful as strength." Paul gave a respectful nod. "I just did what I knew best." The queen's lips curved into the faintest smile, and it was enough. She then turned to Viri. "You, my daughter, have learned more than just new techniques. You have learned to see beyond tradition, beyond what we have always believed." Viri lowered her head slightly. "I have learned that strength is more than power, and that the mind is a weapon just as much as the body." The queen's gaze softened, but only for a moment. She lifted her chin and looked back at the gathered warriors. "The way of the Xilari must evolve," she declared. "The strongest warrior is not the one who fights alone, but the one who adapts, who learns, who grows." Some warriors nodded in agreement. Others remained silent. Ralvik finally spoke. "I may not agree with all of this, but I cannot deny what I have seen." He looked at Paul. "You fight with skill, human, and for that, you have earned my respect." Paul smirked. "I'll take it." Ralvik stepped forward, offering his arm in the Xilari warrior's handshake. Paul grasped it firmly. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. Queen Sivana then turned to the crowd. "From this day forward, the humans will not be seen as weak outsiders. They will be honored as warriors, as allies." The arena erupted in mixed reactions, some cheers, some silence, and some hesitant nods. Change was never easy, but this was a start. As the queen dismissed the gathering, Viri and Paul walked side by side toward the palace. "Well, that was dramatic," Paul said. Viri chuckled. "My mother does not believe in simple words." Paul nodded. "So, what happens now?" Viri glanced at him, a determined glint in her eyes. "Now we train harder. There are still many who doubt us, but soon they won't." Paul smiled. "I like the sound of that." As they walked, one thing was clear. This was just the beginning of something greater. Paul adjusted the straps of his training gear as he stepped into the palace courtyard. The Xilari warriors were still watching him, some with curiosity, others with quiet judgment. Even after the duel, not all of them accepted him. Viri stood beside him, stretching her arms. "They still doubt us," she said, her voice calm but firm. Paul smirked. "Change takes time. At least they aren't trying to throw me out anymore." Viri chuckled. "Give them a reason to respect you, and they will." Paul nodded, knowing she was right. He had fought Ralvik and won, but that wasn't enough to change centuries of Xilari tradition overnight. If he wanted to prove that humans had value in their empire, he had to do more than just win one fight. As they prepared to train, a messenger ran toward them, his expression tense. "Princess Viri, human Paul, the queen has summoned you both immediately." Paul and Viri exchanged glances. The queen rarely summoned them on short notice. Something was wrong. The warning. The queen's chambers were dimly lit, the tall windows revealing the vast city below. Queen Sivana stood near the balcony, her arms crossed, deep in thought. Paul and Viri knelt before her. "You called for us, mother?" Viri asked. The queen turned to face them, her gaze serious. "There are those who do not accept what happened in the arena," she said. "Not all Xilari believe that humans should be honored." Paul exhaled. He had expected this. "Let me guess, some of them want to challenge me again." The queen shook her head. "No, this is not about honor. This is about resistance." Viri frowned. "Resistance." The queen nodded. "Last night, one of my informants intercepted a message. A group of warriors, those who still believe that strength is the only path, are planning something. They do not trust you, Paul, and they do not trust my decision to change our ways." Paul felt a weight settle in his chest. "What are they planning?" The queen's eyes darkened. "I do not know yet, but their leader is someone you both know." Paul already had a bad feeling. "Don't tell me it's Ralvik." Viri's jaw tightened. He accepted his defeat. He even shook Paul's hand. The queen sighed. "Ralvik is a warrior of honor, but his followers, they do not share his discipline. I fear they may act without his approval." Paul rubbed the back of his neck. "Great. So we have a group of angry warriors who think I'm ruining their traditions. That's comforting." Viri turned to her mother. "What do you want us to do?" The queen's expression softened slightly as she looked at her daughter. "I want you to be careful. Watch for any signs of trouble. If they are planning something, we must know before it is too late." Paul nodded. "Understood." Vyri placed a fist over her chest. We will not fail. The queen stepped closer, placing a hand on Vyri's shoulder. I trust you, my daughter. And I trust you, Paul. Do not let me be wrong. A growing storm. As Paul and Vyri left the queen's chambers, Paul couldn't help but shake his head. Why does it feel like every time we win something, another problem shows up? Vyri smirked. That is life. Paul sighed. Yeah. So, what's our plan? Vyri's expression grew serious. We start by watching Ralvik. If he truly does not support this rebellion, we may be able to use him to stop it. Paul nodded. And if he does support it? Vyri's gaze hardened. Then we fight. Paul exhaled, stretching his arms. Guess I should start training extra hard then. Vyri chuckled. I will not go easy on you. Paul grinned. Wouldn't want you to. As they walked toward the training grounds, both of them knew that a storm was coming. And this time, the fight would not be in the arena. It would be in the shadows, against enemies they could not yet see. But they would be ready. The tension in the palace was heavy. Paul and Vyri had spent days watching, waiting, trying to uncover the truth behind the rebellion. Now, they didn't have to wait any longer. A royal guard had rushed into the training hall just moments ago, his face pale with urgency. Ralvik is missing, he had said, and the rebel warriors are gathering outside the city walls. Paul tightened his fists. This was it. Queen Savannah had called for an emergency meeting in the war chamber. Paul and Vyri entered to find the queen standing before a massive holographic map of the city, surrounded by high-ranking warriors and strategists. They are moving fast, one advisor reported. A group of at least 50 warriors, fully armed. Their goal is clear. They want to challenge your rule. The queen's expression was unreadable. And Ralvik. We still do not know where he stands, the guard admitted. Paul crossed his arms. Then we assume the worst. If he's not with us, he's against us. Vyri clenched her jaw. I need to stop this before it turns into war. The queen turned to her daughter. What do you intend to do? Vyri straightened. I will go to them. I will speak with them. Paul frowned. That's dangerous. If they see you as the enemy, they won't listen. Vyri shook her head. I have to try. The queen studied her for a moment before nodding. Then go. But be prepared. Paul sighed. Guess that means I'm going with you. Vyri smirked. Of course. The face-off. The sun was setting as Paul and Vyri arrived at the edge of the city. The rebel warriors stood in formation, their weapons gleaming under the red sky. In front of them stood Ralvik. Paul exhaled. Well, that answers that question. Vyri stepped forward. Ralvik. Her voice carried through the open space. What are you doing? Ralvik's golden eyes locked onto hers. What must be done? Paul shook his head. You shook my hand after the duel. You said you accepted that humans had something to teach. Was that a lie? Ralvik's expression remained cold. I did not lie. But accepting you is not the same as accepting change. Our traditions have lasted for generations. I will not let them be rewritten so easily. Vyri's voice was firm. Change is not weakness. Ralvik's grip tightened on his weapon. You sound like your mother. Vyri took another step forward. Because she is right. The rebels behind Ralvik murmured, uncertain. Some looked at each other, doubt creeping in. Ralvik's eyes flickered as he noticed this. His voice hardened. Enough talk. If you believe in this new path, then fight for it. He raised his weapon. A final duel. You against me, Princess Vyri. If you win, I will order my warriors to stand down. Paul opened his mouth to argue, but Vyri held up a hand. She stepped forward, eyes locked on Ralvik's. I accept. The last duel. The battle was fierce. Ralvik was stronger, but Vyri was faster. She didn't just rely on power. She used every lesson she had learned. Paul watched, his heart pounding. Vyri wasn't just fighting with strength. She was thinking, adapting, using everything they had trained for. Ralvik attacked with a powerful strike, but Viri sidestepped smoothly, countering with a quick strike to his ribs. The impact forced him back, and for the first time, Ralvik looked uncertain. Paul smirked. She's got him. Ralvik growled and lunged, but Viri twisted out of reach, using his own momentum against him. With one final move, she knocked him to the ground, placing her weapon at his throat. Silence filled the air. Viri's voice was steady. Yield. Ralvik stared up at her, breathing hard. Then, slowly, he dropped his weapon. I yield. A new beginning. The rebel warriors hesitated. Then, one by one, they lowered their weapons. Viri stepped back, offering Ralvik a hand. After a moment, he took it and stood. You have changed, princess, he admitted, and perhaps so must I. Viri nodded. We all must. Paul exhaled in relief. Well, that was stressful. Viri smirked. You doubted me. Paul grinned. Never. As they returned to the palace, the future of the Xilari Empire was forever changed. The battle was over, and a new era had begun.